Asia's Four Little Tigers. A comparison of the role of education. Actual tigers not included, unfortunately. They're cute though. Okay, so introduction. Just a quick background about Asia's Four Little Tigers. From 1965 to 1990, 23 economies of East Asia were growing, which was a consequence of the growth of Hong Kong, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, China, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. Um, the World Bank described these countries as high-performing Asian economies. There was a second group of rapidly growing economies, which were termed the Asian tigers or dragons, and those were Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. And their rapid growth began about the same time all the way up to 23 economies started growing. Um, the four societies had one most notable common feature, apart from their rapid levels of economic growth and industrialization. The extent to which their development had been influenced with the neighboring power. Taiwan and South Korea were the product of civil wars, and both societies had been Japanese colonies until 1945. Singapore emerged from the Malaysian Federation, and Hong Kong is a British colony until 1997 was a British colony, which had been both tolerated by and irritant to the People's Republic of China. The need for rapid economic and technological advancement and the impetus for the rapid creation of distinctive sense of national solidarity and identity was caused by the political domain these tensions supported and the strong states of which they were, that they needed maintenance and more economic attention. The critical differences were definitely within the economic domain. These societies all had also exhibited a number of critical differences. Singapore had been clearly benefited from the strongly distinctive role of the government and its location at the center of Southeast Asian trade. Education and development. Their first focus was on structural and institutional factors, seen mostly for their critical development. These included free economic markets or managed markets, export-oriented trade policies, efficient, honest bureaucracies, investment in physical and human capital, and strong and purposeful governments. The main policy was implications to emerge from this prospective focus of the benefits and the need for investment in human capital. The degree of government intervention across the Asian tigers was varied. They were all characterized with what had been termed strong states, which were the dominant civic institutions. In contrast, a second, more social psychological approach to explaining development focuses more on those values and attitudes which are perceived to be prerequisites for development. They were looking for certain attitudes, and punctuality and competitiveness are some of the examples of the sorts of attitudes which were identified throughout the investigation of this paper. Education can be interpreted as one of the social structures which needs to be provided as a basis for development, but they're not all mutually exclusive. They have their roots in different academic disciplines and economies and such. The rapid development of East Asian societies has been explained in terms consistent with an essentially oversimplified version of human capital theory, which results in a generalized and undifferentiated call for investment in education. Primary schooling, the fun part of little children's. The most notable common feature across the societies was the high level of access to elementary or primary schooling prior to industrial takeoff. The high levels of access to basic education were also reflected in relatively high levels of literacy, which were achieved. The nice thing about the education program was it was not gender specific, so both boys and girls were benefited from this effect. The second common feature was the sequential nature of educational expansion and the early stage of growth and industrialization of primary education really took the priority throughout that time. Funding for the primary education, while the pattern wasn't consistent in South Korea and Taiwan, the state provided basic education, while in Hong Kong the early demand was satisfied by private schools, which were most of the time paid for. Which also decided who should be educated and provided, either the schools themselves or the financing of the schools. In Hong Kong, however, the governments allowed the public demand for primary and subsequent secondary education to be satisfied initially by private suppliers. Secondary schooling. The secondary schooling had a general academic and technical education, so they were doing more than just math and reading and other things. They had the learning in the working world and such. The oh, my pages are all messed up. Okay, and then their key goals. There it is. Their key goals were to prepare a minority of pupils for entry to the final stage of formal education, like graduate schools and going into the working class. The curriculum of primary and secondary schools were strongly controlled by the state, especially in Hong Kong, and this resulted in a uniform national curriculum, which is interesting. As far as the nature of the primary school curriculum, the goal has been to provide pupils with high levels of achievement of basic literacy, numeracy, to promote social cohesion and the sense of national identity, and to maximize their chances of access to a prestigious secondary school. So they really wanted to get those kids up and out fairly quickly. Teaching and learning were viewed instrumentally with regard to the goal of maximizing success in highly competitive selection examinations. In South Korea, the college entrance examination operates as the major determinant of what went on in schools and often outside schools. So let's do a lot of their testing outside of once they're done with those schools. Yeah. And then the vocational and technical schooling was provided for a low-income family or those who didn't have a lot of money to pay for the private schools. They were mostly found in Hong Kong and Singapore, but you could find them in other places. And they were provided for small groups of people so they could have more individualized attention. Just a quick summary of all the societies except Hong Kong. They use schools to promote national cohesion and a sense of cultural identity. However, the overall pattern of the higher levels of basic education for males and females is not one which merely stresses the direct impact of the investment in all levels of education on the substantial economic growth. Later on, it became more general to secondary education, and that's it.